Well, this will be the shortest of all our morning presentations. May not have the best news, but it will be the shortest. Okay. So this year we had a number of considerations that the Commission and ourselves wanted to put into this. Obviously, we want to achieve our target harvest rates in all areas. We haven't been doing that because of retrospective issues. In addition, the Commission asked us to give them some understanding of where the levels of uncertainty were in the assessment process, in the harvest rate determination, and in the apportionment as well. We have these continuing retrospective reductions in year class strength and eBio. We have a lot of work in front of us, I believe, in terms of trying to solve the retrospective issue, which is the primary thing that we need to do. We could apply the sort of fix that has been outlined for you, but that is not designed to try and solve the retrospective problem, which is the serious issue here that we need to deal with. We have declining size at age, which is certainly part of the retrospective problem, which is something that we probably cannot control, and its effect on eBio. And then just because of lowered recruitment from the 1988 through 1999 period, we have a decline in natural decline in the stock. The issues that we're facing, and oops, go back, in trying to set these catch limits again, the Commission did ask us to look at uncertainty for this, and Stephen has given you some indication of what that uncertainty is in way of the assessment process. We had, back in 2004, presented sort of a conceptual paper to the Commission on what the sources of uncertainty were in setting catch limits and the assessment itself, but we're just beginning to develop a more comprehensive framework for incorporating these sources of uncertainty that Juan was describing to you in the MSE approach, which will allow us to deal with this in a much more explicit way. But again, assessment is an estimation process. It's not a measurement process, it's estimation. And so in every step in an estimation, you have some uncertainty in all these things, and in many instances they're cumulative, in some instances they're offsetting. The primary sources of uncertainty, as Stephen and Juan have been talking about, they're structural. We have this retrospective estimation of eBio, which is a serious concern to us, and we have model parameter estimation. We move into apportionment, you have an additional set of uncertainties that are associated with that. This is the normal process of assessment and catch limit setting, and it's there behind this. And if you talk with most assessment biologists, there's a fairly clear understanding of this, but we've made this much more explicit this year than you may have seen before, but this is something that's in the background of virtually every kind of assessment, although the retrospective issue is somewhat larger in the case here. We did, in the assessment process, in the raw and stuff, we've included examples of the effect of that structural uncertainty, alternative model presentations, and the statistical uncertainty in the apportionment process. We've also considered the realized harvest rates that result from these retrospective reductions in eBio, and the need to determine what the impact of these progressions are in terms of what our target harvest rate should be. So one of the things we need to be doing here is needing to go back and actually evaluate our harvest policy. How robust is the harvest policy to this kind of misspecification? If you look, for example, in Area 2, we had a number of years with very high exploitation rates in those areas. The stock didn't crash in the areas, so we need to determine just to what extent, how much robustness do we have in the harvest policy when we come up with a target harvest rate. That harvest rate, does it need to change? Do we need to make some different recommendations in this? So we have a fair amount of work to do in front of us next year, and I think the issue of the retrospective changes are probably the biggest thing. This is just, again, the slide that Stephen was pointing out to you and showing the sources of change in estimated eBio in here that come along with different choices of parameters and different sort of structural assumptions. These things are probably no surprise to most assessment biologists, but this is something that we haven't necessarily presented explicitly to you before. So as Stephen was pointing out in the assessment, the staff is recommending the use of the Wobble SQ model, variant based both on the objective criteria of model fits and because it's a more precautionary approach. As Stephen pointed out and Juan has pointed out, we have obviously some issues of retrospection here, so going with a lower number is a lot more precautionary than going with a higher number. The retrospective issues continue to be evident. It has been observed in other catch at age models, and as Stephen was pointing out, this may be something that changes with whatever direction that the stock is going, whether it's increasing or decreasing may have a different component of the retrospective thing. We do have, as we get more information on the stock, we keep on revising our estimates of eBio downwards of the current eBio, and the catch limit recommendations have gone along with that. Now, we haven't, we presented to you some potential ways to deal with this. We have not decided whether a change in approach is needed right now, if it's the appropriate thing to do. We're fairly sensitized over the last several years, thank you, Dan, for the issue of not sort of dumping change on you without having a chance to evaluate it for yourselves as well as for ourselves. In this case here, we feel we have more work to do on this kind of thing, but we're essentially putting you on notice that this is a fairly serious issue in our view, and we need to get a very good understanding of it ourselves. We may come back here next year with a different approach to what the harvest rate should be, but we have some work to do in the interim period. The implementation of a management strategy evaluation will give us an additional tool to do with this, but again, we're kind of at early stages in the MSE. We haven't sat down and gone through the actual conditioning model that Juan has developed for this to make sure that it actually meets all of the needs that we need to have for this kind of process. So for moving forward in the recommendations that we're presenting to you for 2012, we're continuing to use the 0 to 400, the hook competition survey timing adjustments, and the slow up, full down. Just to go into those briefly, the 0 to 400, whatever we choose for the depth range, this has some bias in it. If we're using the 20 to 275, we're ignoring some areas where fishing is occurring. If we're using 0 to 400 but only using 20 to 275 data for estimation of that, we've got a bias because we're not sampling in areas where we know the fish is going on and we're estimating biomass for it. Each one of these has some bias built into it. We have proposed a way to deal with this by expanding our survey into the 0 to 400 range. That's a very expensive proposition, and as yet we don't have funding to do that, but we're trying to seek that from the two governments. We'll continue to use the hook adjustment factors in this. They're sensible things to do in terms of trying to deal with potential differences in catchability across the range. And the slow up, full down, in retrospect, is something that we probably should have gone to as soon as the stock started to go into its downhill trajectory, because we ended up sort of chasing the falling star on that, and we never caught up with these 50% reductions. So we probably should have gone to that somewhat earlier. So the recommendations we're making for you this year in terms of catch limits are based on the Wobble SQ and the adjustments, as we pointed out here. The total CEY out of this is 50 million pounds. Looking at the other removals here are around 16.6 million pounds. We end up with recommended catch limits totaling 33 million pounds. There are only two areas where we're recommending an increase, and that is again using the slow up, full down. So that's a third of the difference between last year's catch limit and this year's fishery CEY, an increase in 2A, an increase in 2C. Just to point out that the change in fishery CEY, in total CEY in this things means that we do have some changes in the GHLs for area 2C and 3A, an increase in area 2C and a decrease in area 3A. This is associated with the Council's recommendations on the linkages between halibut biomass and the GHL. Other issues in terms of management recommendations, we're proposing March the 15th to November the 15th for quota share fisheries. Again, it's a bit of a trade-off between opportunity for fishing and movement of fish. The 2A commercial and treaty Indian fisheries should fall within that adopted season as well. A series of 10-hour openings in area 2A, which is the last area where we have derby openings starting on June 27th and then proceeding on 2-week intervals. We're also recommending to the Commission that the Management Council's catch sharings plans for 2A and 4CDE be adopted, as well as the DFO Commercial Sport Allocation Plan for Area 2B, noting that there may be some changes in those numbers, but we're simply recommending to the Commission that the allocation framework be adopted. A couple of minor things, some Area 2A logbook options. The staff recommends allowing the use of the Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife fixed gear logbook for Area 2A commercial fisheries. We also recommend changing the IPHC regulations to match the integrated logbook regulations for Area 2B, which requires latitude, longitude for fishing locations rather than distance and direction, and catch weights recorded by set rather than by day. To deal with Area 2C, sport charter management, as you know, the Commission took action last year because the Council and the National Marine Fisheries Service did not come up with a method for controlling the charter harvest in Area 2C. We requested from the North Pacific Council some guidance on what measures they would like to implement to try and use this, and there was a Charter Halibut Implementation Committee chaired by Ed Dersham that polled the users and tried to come up with some better ways to do this. Kudos to Scott Meyer from ADF&G here, who produced the background analysis for it. The recommendation that's been brought forward to the Commission is for what's called a reverse slot limit. So fish could be retained at they're less than or equal to 45 inches or greater than equal to 68 inches with the head on. This is intended to keep the charter fishery harvest within the 931,000 pound guideline harvest level for Area 2C. Again, the entire carcass must be retained while the fish is on board. We're noting to the Commission, and this is not necessarily unique to Area 2C, but we are concerned that whenever we make a recommendation for a change in a management measure, that in this case, for example, it doesn't account for mortality of fish that would be discarded within that slot limit. Obviously, the fish can't be retained. There's going to be some level of discard mortality associated with that, and again, Scott Meyer did a good paper in 2006 estimating that something on the order of 5% or less. This is not unique to Area 2C, as I said. In areas where we have sport fisheries and we have any kind of discard process going on, which is the case in most places where we have sport fisheries, we don't have a way currently to estimate the mortality on that because the data aren't being collected to allow us to do that. So this was simply a trigger in this case of a recommendation was brought forward to this. The staff is noting to the Commission that when this kind of approach is taken, it should be twinned with the idea that we need to collect data that's going to allow us to estimate the mortality associated with that fishery. So that's a commentary we'll be having with the Commission. It may end up being a commentary backwards to the agencies from the Commission. And that's it. So we have now a period probably approaching 50 minutes for question and answers. We have a mic here at the front there. If you have a question, could you please identify yourself when you come up? If you're working with an agency or a group, please identify who it is that you're representing. So I'll invite the commissioners to come back up to the front table, and then we'll open this up for discussion.
Go ahead. Should I go ahead?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm Leonard Herzog, a little bit new to the Halibut area. I'm the skipper on our boat is out in the Bering Sea and asked me to ask a question and give some brief testimony. His name's Jay Heber. He fishes mostly in 4C and 4D. He experienced really good catch rates this last year and even better this year. And he's concerned that the fish there have different habits now, and that you're not seeing them in your survey. But if you note your trawl survey that you just looked at on page 149, the total biomass is increasing in both numbers and total biomass. And the size of our catches are healthy. We're seeing all sizes in our catches. Yet the new models and the new area biomass is asking for a 35% decrease in commercial harvest this year. And if the model was going to be used only, I understand it would be another 35% reduction next year for a total of 75 or 80% reduction in the catch. And as everybody knows, it's not only a commercial fishery, but It's a fishery that the local people in the Pribilofs and in the St. Matthews area depend on, heavily. And it's not just larger boats coming out of Seattle. And we're finding that the fish are very available to us early in the season and late in the season when the weather doesn't let us get out there, and that the fish are very deep and probably not available to use. So I'd ask you to take a really hard look during this meeting at what you intend to do with 4C and 4D, because our personal catch efforts suggest that the biology is a lot stronger there than we're hearing, with a 70% possible reduction over 2 years. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. The sort of performance of individuals over the whole commercial fishery, or the surveys, obviously is something that changes over time. I think the issue of the sort of the double whammy of reductions on there, I was trying to be at pains to say that, this is a major task force next year. It's possible we could come back with something that is that substantial. I think were we to do something like that, and this is totally speculative, but were we to do something like that, we probably would recommend something like a phasing in for that. But at this point, I think most of you who have been participating in these meetings for quite a while would recognize that when the staff believes really strongly in something, then we're not really all that hesitant about recommending that it happen right now. But I think we do have a lot of questions about how we should be approaching this, whether or not that's the correct thing to be doing right now. So we want to be trying to solve that problem as opposed to just sort of putting that thing on it and not knowing exactly what the effect's going to be or whether that's the right approach to take.
Yeah, so if I could, just one last comment. Jay's main consideration is that with the surveys, it's a very difficult area out there weather-wise and whale-wise. And he always says if you're going to go survey and look for ice in the summertime, you're not going to find anything. And so he's really concerned that he can find the fish whenever and wherever he wants along the whole edge, yet the survey's not finding the fish. Thank you.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, hello, my name is Elbridge Walker, and I'm a commercial fisherman in 3A. This was my first year out, but I did notice it seemed like there's an awful lot of small fish. And I'm almost wondering if maybe these models could take into consideration some kind of, stress that's put on the fish, maybe the heavier pressure, because they get hit real hard from March 15th until November 15th. And I'm almost wondering if that just continual pressure on the fish is maybe stressing them out a little bit and contributes to their size being smaller. And with that said, it almost seems like maybe we need to be installing some type of size limit on the upper side as well, so that we continue this biomass on the smaller side to continue up through the whole thing. My feeling would be that maybe, a 30 to 60 inch in 3A would be a good thing, to try to get some of those bigger fish and keep our genetics there as well. That, genetics could play a portion in this as well with stress. I mean, I don't really know what it is, but we definitely got to get some bigger fish out there. And to be honest, I would rather see you guys go on the lower side of estimates to be safe than the higher. So, it's all about protecting the fishery to me. So
it is. Thank you. And certainly that the staff's feelings that, as Stephen was alluding to, we asked Tim Lord to put together a paper for us on sort of potential causes in changes in size and age for fishery. And certainly genetics is one of the ones that was high on the list to look at on these things. We have looked at several years worth of genetic data on this, but as Tim pointed out in the paper, and when this meeting is finished, we're going to go back and talk about how we design the research programs to do this. But as Tim pointed out when we discussed this initially, is that we may be in the situation now trying to lay the groundwork with research programs now that's going to allow us to evaluate things 4 or 5 years from now. Because when we go backwards in data, you find out that, the kinds of data that you might want to use to evaluate that kind of process just really were never collected. So it's kind of hard to go backwards in those things. To get at your other point about whether or not there's a stress involved there, That's possible, and it may not necessarily be the stress from the fishery. It could be the stress from sort of spatial competition with other species or something like that. We do know that when we look at some of these areas where we've seen some increase in catch rates in those areas, what needs to be kept in mind too is oftentimes this is now associated with a much lower level of effort than we had 4 or 5 years ago in those areas. And so when you decrease the stress from the fishery and the fish, they do have a chance to aggregate more, and sometimes you'll just get an automatic increase in catch rate simply because there's less fishing pressure on them, and it endorses what you're saying.
Yeah, you know, one thing I'm thinking is you know, maybe do keep that season open March 15th to November 15th, but maybe have first half closed, second half open, you know, and just lay off of them for a little bit and keep the same quotas, you know. I mean,
for folks who weren't here at the time, you know, we used to have a layup program where, you know, you could go out and fish for a while and you had to lay up for a while before you go back out again. So that was one of the techniques that was used when we were sort of getting into almost the derby fisheries.
yeah, I think it'd just be best if they got laid off of for, you know, a complete period of time and then came back on. You know, I got to believe that would help.
Yeah, thank you.
My name is Jeff Kaufman, and I'm with the St. Paul Fishermen. We noticed that some of the highest concentrations of halibut in the Bering Sea are in the area that is closed to directed halibut fishing. Our question is, what is the purpose of that closed area, and has the Commission considered opening up again to, or opening it up to the commercial halibut fleet?
Yeah. Thanks, Jeff. Yeah, the issue of the closed area was something that was originally designed when there was foreign fishing in the area, and it was designed as a savings area for smaller fish. When the Americanization, if you will, of the fishery happened, we didn't carry forward the protections that we had previously established for non-domestic fisheries when we established the domestic fisheries in those areas. So as you point out, the only gear that's excluded from there right now is the set line fishery. That we allow trawl fishing in there, which wasn't allowed during the period of abstention that period. So the Commission did discuss this at our retreat. Actually, I think at the interim meeting we had some discussion on this as well. And they asked us to, we brought out the paper. This was reviewed in I think 1998 or 1999, something like that. The staff, I don't think there's a compelling reason to keep the set line fishery out of that area if you have other fisheries operating in the area. If there was a compelling argument for me, it would be the opposite way around, is not to have fishing in those areas. But it's not a trivial issue to open that up to the set line fishery, because one of the things that needs to happen there is how would we assign the catches from those areas to regulatory areas. But the Commission did have this discussion with it, and the staff said there really is not a compelling reason to keep the set line fishery out of that area. There's a subsequent step that would have to happen, perhaps at the council level, in terms of allocation that will go on within that, Jeff.
My name's Jerry Christensen from Canada. Bruce, I wanted to ask a question. I noticed in preparing for the performance review and other things, and like many of us rehearsing what the convention says, that the convention authorizes action to, quote, permit, limit, regulate, or prohibit the incidental catch of halibut that may be taken, retained, possessed, or landed from each area or portion of an area by vessels fishing for other species of fish. It also goes on to say that the parties have the power to, quote, close to all taking of halibut, such portions, such portion or portions of an area or areas as the International Pacific Halibut Commission finds to be populated by small immature halibut and designates as nursery grounds. Has the staff ever considered whether that kind of recommendation should be made to the commissioners, or have, in your experience, members of the Commission ever asked the staff to take action to consider whether there are areas, because of the large concentrations of immature halibut, that ought to be designated as nursery areas, thereby dealing with at least a portion of the bycatch issue, which is of concern to so many of us?
The answer is yes and yes. Certainly the staff has thought about this sort of in our Friday afternoon musings many times. The issue that needs to be sort of clearly understood in that is that anything the Commission does is a recommendation to the parent governments, and the parent governments must accept that recommendation in order for that to take effect. So we can look at our survey data and show where, or the NIMS trawl survey data, for example, and show where there are small fish. If there was to be a recommendation of that, that has to be accepted by the parent governments to do that, Jared.
Morning, Bruce.
Morning, Simeon.
Could
you just, for the webinar, identify yourself?
Okay, Simeon Spotsov Jr. Represented the tribal government to St. Paul out in the Pribilofs. And, you know, last year I was here at the meeting and things were looking pretty good for St. Paul out in Area 4. You know, we even got a slight bump in quota, which was fantastic, and I was excited about that. And now I come here to this meeting and you're singing a different song. You know, it's very disturbing to us that we bank on what's happening out there so much that what may happen in the future is really frightening. You know, I'm thankful that the North Pacific Fishery Management Council is taking action in regards to bycatch, and I'm almost feeling that what's happening here today with the council dealing with bycatch issues on halibut almost sounds like it could be a little bit too late. You know, if things are going to be bad for us this coming year and then possibly be worse for us in 2013, you know, I don't know what I'm going to say here when I go in a conference committee and start thinking about how are we going to work on this here. You know, it's very puzzling to me right now, and I wanted the people in this room and you guys to know that and hear me. So I thank you.
Thanks. You lied to me.
What I said was true without my retrospective bias. You know, last night I wasn't going to come up and talk. Anyways, thank you for the opportunity. My name's Dan Falvey, and I'm with the Alaska Longline Fishermen's Association. I have 2 comments on some of the work Juan's doing and just 1 comment on the retrospective bias. First, I want to say thank you, Juan. Still trying to understand completely what you showed, but I think it's a very interesting approach and one that caused me to think about the stock and some of the size considerations in different ways. I do know as I'm going to try and think about this a bit more, there's one piece of it that I didn't see in your presentation that would help me understand it. In the size limit and in the retrospective bias presentations, I didn't see any extrapolation of what that might mean to harvest, the catch limits over a 5 or 10-year period. For example, in the size limits, you know, it was very clear that we'd probably have to drop the harvest rate down to achieve the same level of protection for the spawners, but how that would translate out over a 5 or 10-year period given the expanded exploitable biomass, I wasn't really clear on. And the same when we were looking at the retrospective bias type thing, you know, we may have to drop the harvest rate down to 13 or 14%, and that would cause a lost yield, but it seems like we could put an estimate on how much yield was lost versus how much ultimate spawning biomass we may gain over that 5 or 10-year period. Those shouldn't be the deciding factors at all, but it seemed like that they were gone was a big piece of the puzzle that would help me understand those.
I think one of the things that's important about that, and Juan alluded to this when we're talking about the MSC, is bringing stakeholders into the process so we can talk about what are the metrics of performance, what are the objectives behind the process. I don't know if you want to say anything else about that.
Sure.
Thank you, Dan. Your questions are always welcome and insightful, so that's good to hear. And I didn't put the 5-year projections in terms of potential catch limits, but that is something that can be calculated, at least for the assumptions that are, and for the projections, the 5-year projections that are in the retrospective pattern. It's kind of hard to talk with you in my back there. But the point is that the 5-year projections there, they focus on exploitable biomass and on the spawning biomass. So you can calculate based on those spawning biomass trajectories what the catch limits were. So something that could be done. But then again, you need to be very careful regarding the assumptions you make regarding the reaction and decisions over the next 5 years, say changing target harvest rates, or they're going to stay the same. So something that can be worked out. So thanks for bringing it up. But the second question was on the
second question is on the MSC
evaluations.
And one of the pieces I think would be helpful as we get down that road is what you've done now is looked at the stock as a whole. And if I think to really understand what the impacts are, it's going to have to be able to look at area-specific levels. As stakeholders, our quota is tied to area-specific levels, and some of the objectives of the Commission such as age structure and that are really tied to area-specific levels. And so I don't know if it's possible, but in the future, could you start breaking, your ground truthing is what I call it. You call it something else of the operational model.
Can you step to the mic, Dan?
So in the future, as you're doing the MSC work to try and ground truth the operating model, could you look at it on an area-specific basis so that we could actually see how it can recreate some of the performance indicators such as average age, such as commercial CPUE and survey CPUE by area rather than as an aggregate across the whole?
That is also an excellent point, and if you look at the presentation, that's part of the things that could be incorporated in the operating model, like spatial structure, migration, area-specific indices, and it's on the works. I mean, I'm working on it right now. I mean, the results are preliminary, and I cannot present them as is, but it's effectively that's what I'm heading. So, thanks.
Yeah, thanks, and just to that kind of recapitulate the discussion we had on staff about 2 weeks ago about the MSC process is that it really begs an area-specific approach, particularly because you want to go back and have the data actually that you have available to actually apply to the areas where it's been collected from. So then you have an alternative way to sort of put the data set together.
Yeah, no, thank you. I think that'll be really helpful to us. The last comment I have, which is very quick, is this, again, to thank you for bringing the retrospective bias issue up ahead of time so it doesn't become binding as a policy on the current year's catch limits, because that really makes it difficult for us to tease out whether it's a good solution to it or whether or not you're just swapping quota from area to area. And my question is, next year, as you look at the retrospective issue, you're going to probably come up with a policy to address it next year. Will we have a chance to review that policy next year before it becomes binding on next year's catch limits?
Yeah, I would say yes, Dan. I think probably what we're trying to do is while we're going through the research this year, we probably will try to make that research public to the extent that we're able to finish it in time before next annual meeting or something like that, because it obviously is going to need something that people are going to want to think about for a bit. So.
Thank you.
I'm sorry, we had someone from Alpha.
I'm not from Alpha. I'll change that. Linda Benkham, actually speaking for the Halibut Coalition, and just a couple comments and a question to make sure I understood properly. But in looking at the retrospective bias in your work to evaluate what's going on with that, there was a slide up there that showed, or Stephen had a slide up there showing where the change in the year classes is. So you see fish moving through the population and then they sort of disappear when you think that the bar should keep going up. And it looked to me like that time when those fish were disappearing is the 94 to 2002 year class, so 8 to 10-year-old fish. And that those fish disappearing, that unspecified mortality, I think is how Stephen put it, could be a pretty important contributing factor to that retrospective bias. And whether that's coming from bycatch or from those fish not growing, it seems like it's too early to dismiss either of those theories. And I just wanted to make sure those are both in front of you as something you're going to explore as you move farther in this evaluation.
They absolutely are. Absolutely.
Great. Thanks. I had one other issue I wanted to bring up. And maybe question also on this to Juan, but we are concerned at the coalition that the council's recommendations for the charter management in Area 2C doesn't include mortality estimates. Appreciate that you've flagged that. Hope that the commission will do what they can to accommodate that when they adjust management measures for Area 2C and request that those mortality rates be included in future recommendations. Also made me wonder, listening to Juan's presentation on the lowering the minimum size limit. In the past, we've had an approach, and even the slot limit includes an approach that sets a maximum size limit in the charter fishery. So shifting the harvest to smaller fish, which are not sexually mature yet. Wondered if that's something Juan has looked at, thought it might be appropriate to take a look at that in 2C, where charter harvest is a fairly significant component of total removals, particularly because the IPH or the council right now is going through this evaluation of appropriate management tools to use for the charter fleet at low levels of abundance as part of the catch sharing plan. So I just wondered if that's been looked at, how that use of maximum size shift and catch down size-wise in sport charter fisheries.
Yeah, it has not been looked at in that context. We have several times looked at the issue of a maximum size limit and its effect on dynamics and spawning stock per recruit, I think, but it hasn't been looked at specifically in that context, Linda, no.
Thank you.
Chris Spohr from Canada. I just wanted to build on the question Dan asked about, and you responded to Bruce about, thank you for giving us the heads up that you're looking at this retrospective bias, and obviously that will lead to maybe some other things that you're going to bring up. And you mentioned you might try and make this information public. I think that's very helpful for us in industry just to be able to think about it a bit. I'm still a couple years behind trying to work through some of that stuff, but I guess I'm just wondering if you'd given any thought to how you would make it public. Just in that, I'm quite comfortable to call you up and ask, the simplest of questions, and I appreciate the time. But I'm just wondering, I think it'll be important that if there's some kind of venue that it is presented somehow, like, I don't know, a webinar or whatever, but I would just encourage to give some thought. I think it'd also be probably more efficient on the staff instead of getting several calls from me and everybody else in the room to do it all at once.
Okay, yeah, that's very, and to be honest, we hadn't thought about how that should be done, but whether it's done through, a webinar or an interactive bulletin board or something like that, with all those things aren't possible.
Yeah, I just think because, in the industry we have a hard time, it's keeping up with some of the changes, and it can be problematic, and I just think if we could, we appreciate the efforts you're thinking of that, if there are some changes coming, how to give us the heads up. Yeah. So thank you.
Thanks, Chris.
Hello, Lou Dockerman, my name. I've been only fishing halibut for 38 years, so I've done the bad times when there was no fish, and I've done the really good times when there was a lot of fish. But we're having a real problem, and the problem is bycatch. I know you don't want to be talked about bycatch, and I brought that up at the scientific meeting, but we've taken the shorts in our quota. We're down to half, yet the bycatch continues. Now look at some people that are in other places. For 6 years I've put in proposals with the council to get 100% observer coverage in the Gulf for 1 year. Nothing has happened. Nothing, not one thing. They're making little things, and I heard it from the guys from St. Paul, but they're not doing anything. And we don't have any bycatch things going at all. It's going to be 2-3 years before they do this. And it's time that the commission takes a stand. We're taking it in the shorts in a bad way. And I don't mind taking it in the shorts. I've said that a couple, 3 years ago. Quota's too high, got to go down. But the guys that catch all the bycatch, the draggers in Kodiak and the draggers in the Bering Sea guys had 14 million pounds. We're taking 5 or 6. So they're taking double what we catch. And in the Gulf, it's worse. You would talk to guys in Kodiak, and they come back, oh, Jesus, we caught 100,000 pounds of fish. We had to throw them over, but they were little. You have it all the time. And you know action needs to be taken at the council. The council is run by the draggers, and they don't give us a chance. Every year we sit around, and we put a proposal in. The Canadians took care of their stuff, but we don't. Why is that? I'm really angry, It really makes me mad. They catch a lot more than we do. This is nuts. And you guys got to take action. The commission got to take action. They can't just sit and say, well, we do the scientific stuff. I take part in all this, but it's not right. The bycatch got to come down for the other guys too. We take it in the shorts, they take it in the shorts. I want an equal reduction for those people, the same reduction we are getting. For every time they take a pound of us, we take a pound of them. This is crazy. And you got to take action.
Mr. Chairman, Commissioners, Dr. Leaman, I'm Blake Tipton from SM Products. I'm also the President of Halibut Association North America. Bruce, you've asked us to swallow a big, expensive pill. And we've had many talks over the years. I got one question for you. Is this the bottom, or are you going to come back next year and say we take more cuts?
I don't know if it's the bottom. We certainly have not, in some areas, seen a bottom declining in the WPUE. If we cannot solve the retrospective problem with actually solving it within the assessment, we may come back and recommend the kind of fix that's been discussed at this meeting. So no, I can't guarantee that we're hit bottom.
Thank you.
Going once? Aha.
Dave Boyce from Canada. A couple of things. I wanted to ask Juan on his Juan's evaluation of the effect of lowering the minimum size, whether or not he considered the possibility that the selectivity in the commercial fishery would actually increase. Looking at the way I fish with 100% at-sea monitoring, I think I would do just the opposite of what he's suggesting the fleet would do. I'd bring in larger fish. I'd avoid the areas where there are smaller fish. So I'd like him to consider that and maybe look at his evaluation in that light. And the second thing is I think he ought to take into consideration the effect of the lowering of wastage that you would have in lowering the size limit in the hook and line fishery, but also, of course, and this is really the elephant in the room, the effect that it would have on the bycatch up in the Bering Sea and in the Gulf in the trawl fishery, because it would all be legal fish, and they'd have to deal with it.
Yeah.
And I'd just like to kind of reinforce what Lou said there. This is the big issue. We saw this year that wasted dead halibut lying on the bottom was 20% of the removals in the North Pacific. 20% of what we're taking out of this resource we're killing and leaving on the bottom. It's crazy. And in the coming year, it's going to be more than that, because the wastage will probably not go down proportionately to the cuts we're going to see in the CEY. This is the issue. 20% wastage. It's unconscionable, and I don't know how we get there, but that's got to be job one for all of us, and I'd like the Commission to address that.
Just a couple of points on that. In terms of changing the selectivity, that's sort of an easy enough thing to do from a modeling perspective. We can shift the selectivity curves to look at that. The other issue of the amount of wastage that would be dropped by this, actually, if you look at one of the panels in the last set of those contours there, one of them is the amount of discard, how that would change with changes in the size limit. So that is there in that. In terms of, your comment that there's a lot of wastage in here, you need to, in my view, you need to look at that very carefully, because most of that fish is going to be sexually immature fish. And the idea of then targeting sexually immature fish, that's one of the aspects of the size limit analysis that was looked at there, is that's not a good thing from just standard life history theory.
But that's what we're doing. That's what the wastage is sexually immature fish. Millions and millions of pounds of it. We've got to stop doing it.
But if the alternative is to I assume you're saying is to not waste it. So in what sense? To not catch it, or to not waste it?
there need to be incentives to stop killing those small fish. And if that involves restructuring the way we look at this whole thing, then that's what it involves. And yeah.
So it seems that you were getting at two. Sorry, it seems that you were getting at two aspects. Thank you, Dave, for the question and observations. In terms of the amount that is wastage, that is wasted, part of waste, it will be actually we look at that in the analysis, and as Bruce said, is the bottom right panel on figures 14 and 15, pages 56 of the Blue Book, and there's a table as well that you can actually tabulate that, and at least on a cost-wide sense, along with the selectivities that Stephen and I looked at, the actual percentage of yield that you're losing due to wastage is listed as discard there, but it's basically wastage. It will be less than 10%. So although it may be higher and lower, if we were to look at this in an area-by-area base, that's basically the numbers that we're looking at in terms of wastage per se. And then in terms of the potential changes in actually the selectivity shifting to the right by dropping the size limit, that's something that actually we discussed a little bit. I think when we were talking about this thing, is actually one of the worries that that dropping the size limit may be. That is to say, if the it's the perception that there's less large fish out there, and therefore the catch, the recommended catch limits are, for example, smaller because there are less large fish out there, and the presumption is that by reducing or dropping the size limit, we're going to have more total fish that we can catch, and all of a sudden we can target larger fish with that larger amount. It's like we're compounding the problem itself. So it may lead you to that, to try to catch larger fish, but it's actually counter to part of the things that we thought at the beginning. It's something that can be looked at, certainly. So.
Thanks, Juan.
Russell Cameron, Canadian commercial fisherman. I just came up because I didn't want to end on talking about bycatch issues and stuff here, not because I don't think it's important. I think it's something we really got to deal with and needs to be done. But I heard at this presentations of Juan and everybody else that we've basically been longline and sport fishery, we've been overfishing for the last 10 years maybe, and based on the retrospective stuff, and that's probably going on, and we still haven't dealt with it. So I think we got to look at our own thing and be thinking about the catch limits now, and the effect that's going to have on the building the stock. So at any rate.
Yeah, thanks, Russell. I don't want to separate those two issues because bycatch could very well be part of the retrospective issue.
Dr. Leaman, during Dr. Hare's presentation, he made a comment when he was looking at those bomb site graphics.
Yes.
And he indicated that he had changed and made some different assumptions, and one of them was a doubling of the bycatch. But never did I hear, did that answer in part of the retrospective analysis issues? And so is it to what degree, or does it? That's the question.
No, it didn't solve anything. But the way I did it was simply to double the estimate. Retrospective things tend to derive from trends. From you know, it's increasing, it's changing. All I do is simply double everything. So it's not even a trend. It's doubling everything. And all it did was actually increase the estimate of E-bio a little bit, because it says if there's double the biomass, the catch rate you see, there must have been a little bit more exploitable biomass. So we need to do a lot more with different trends in biomass, different size categories. You know, there's a whole range of dozens of things you could try. I took the quick signal I could do because I was trying dozens of things, and just made the bycatch mortality double, and it did not affect the retrospective behavior at all.
think coming back to the potential effect of bycatch and on retrospective patterns and on unspecified mortality, I think it's important to make an observation. It's like we can look at the problem twofold. One can be a problem of unspecified mortality, for example, due to unreported catch or bycatch or excess wastage, to explain the changes from those high initial estimates of recruitment into the following years that we see that they are not there, we cannot see them. The alternative view that we need also to keep in mind is that those original estimates could have been biased high, that is, they were never there. So that's a point that we're not discussing, and it is part of the retrospective analysis that is included in the reports in the Blue Book and in the RARA. So it's two things that we need to keep in mind. Either it could be unspecified mortality or it could be an initial overestimate of something that now we are seeing that there's little evidence that they could have been there. So those are two problems.
Thanks, Juan. And just actually to amplify on that, part of the issue in estimating the cohort strengths, of course, is when you get your first looks at them, they're not very well selected by the fishery. So you're taking a very small proportion of that year class and expanding it into a huge number. So it's going to be inherently poorly estimated. I think it's basically Juan's point. Okay.
Yeah, on the 32-inch size limit right now, and talk about reducing the minimum size limit. 32 inches was determined the appropriate size or the magic number in 1974, and fish were, I assume they were 8 years old at 32 inches in 1974, but now 32 inches is approximately 11 years old fish, so common sense tells me that something's not fitting here. And then maybe 32 inches you're claiming is a good size now, and my mind tells me that maybe the 32-inch since 74 was too small for all those years.
Thanks, Philip. I think it's not so much the idea that 32-inch is a magic number right now. It's that decreasing it doesn't really gain us anything in this and actually has some potential harm in it.
Thank you, Dr. Leaman. Thanks to all of the people who had questions. I doubt that we've answered all of them, so don't be hesitant to try to catch our attention and ask us other questions. We look forward to your continued participation. Hope your ideas get to the PAG and the conference board. And we'll look forward to Thursday afternoon to see you.
Just a reminder about the reception this evening.
Please remind them about the reception.
Yeah, just wishing you good fortune in your deliberations and reminding you there is a no-host reception at the top of the world starting at 7 o'clock. Thank you.
Hope to see many at 7 o'clock tonight, and we'll see you Thursday afternoon for our next session. Thanks.